Salutations, respected viewers. This is George from Ireland, and I'm continuing my series about Germany 1919 to 45 for A-level history. So up until this point, I've primarily focused on domestic politics. It's now time to consider German foreign policy and international relations in the era. Blatantly, there was a great deal of connectivity between what was going on in internal politics and the foreign sphere. So, as you know, the armistice was signed on the 11th of November 1918, which suspended the First World War. It wasn't formally ended until June 1919. The victorious Allies met in Paris, and they first of all dealt with Germany at Versailles, that palace just to the south of Paris. The Allies discussed amongst themselves the terms they would impose on Germany. So, present were representatives of the United States, the UK, Italy, France, and so on. The big four: Vittorio Orlando of Italy, David Lloyd George, the British Prime Minister, President Woodrow Wilson of the United States, and Georges Clemenceau, the Prime Minister of France. And this was huge news because up until this time, national leaders very seldom went abroad during their term of office. American presidents did not leave the United States during their term of office. I know we're accustomed to presidents and prime ministers jetting all around the globe every week these days, but back then it was unprecedented. Anyway, so some people thought this was the war to end all wars, the Great War for Civilization, as the Allies had called it. But people disagreed about the way to secure the long-term peace. Some countries had suffered horrifically and were furious. They were in a vengeful mood. The French in particular had been invaded by France in 1870 as well. Now, admittedly, that was because France declared war on them. But anyway, they wanted to make sure that they never, ever experienced a repeat performance because they had suffered so grievously. They had suffered 1.6 million dead. The British had suffered 800,000 dead. Bear in mind, France's population was smaller than that of the United Kingdom. The UK had spent £1 billion on the war, was £1 billion in debt to the United States. It's trifling now, but back then that was a staggering sum of money, whereas the United States was $3 billion in debt to the United States, which for a smaller country with less of an industrial base was an almost crushing financial burden. So they wished to make Germany pay for all that. Anyway, Clemenceau, he wanted to punish the Germans the most. He had an American wife, but he was vociferously anti-American. He said the United States was the only country which had gone from barbarism to decadence without the intervening period of civilization. Incidentally, he married his former pupil because he'd been a teacher in the United States, Mary Plummer. It wouldn't be allowed these days. They considered splitting up Germany into dozens of different countries. They said Germany was only united in 1871. This didn't happen. They thought about a buffer state in Western Germany. Again, this didn't happen, but they were allowed to occupy the Rhineland for 15 years. They got the Saarland also for 15 years. After that time, there was to be a plebiscite when the Saarland was able to decide between remaining part of France or rejoining Germany. In the end, Saarland opted to go back to Germany. Anyway, Clemenceau was disappointed the other Allies leaders didn't back him up sufficiently as he saw it. So Lord George did not want to be too hard on Germany for various reasons. He thought that if it wrecked the Germans' economy, these peace terms, then that would actually damage the United Kingdom as well. He perceived a greater new threat to be communism, which had taken over Russia. However, he was a politician with elections to win, and that's why he had to parrot these popular slogans: make Germany pay, squeeze Germany until the pips squeak, as in you're crushing a fruit, hang the Kaiser. The Kaiser fled to the Netherlands, and the Treaty of Versailles indeed provided for the Kaiser to stand trial for supreme offence against international morality, as it said. Anyway, so he vowed, that's Lloyd George vowed to the British people, that he would ensure Germany paid down to the last brass farthing of reparations. Anyway, this was the bloodiest war that the British had fought against another country. The U-boat campaign to starve the British into surrender had not quite worked, but there had been severe hardship. Anyway, So Lloyd George didn't want to be too tough on Germany for various reasons, despite what he said in public. Italy had not performed well in the war. This is Orlando I'm coming on to now, the Italian Prime Minister. And the Treaty of London, signed in 1915, had promised Italy lots of territorial gains from Austria-Hungary, but France and the United Kingdom were later going to back out on those and not give Italy as much as she wanted. That's primarily the Treaty of Saint-Germain that I would come on to with Austria a little bit later. But Orlando achieved little for Italy during the negotiations, and he actually left and lost his prime ministership just before it was signed. So Wilson was more magnanimous. He believed in being forgiving, partly for moral reasons. Also thought it made another war less likely. The French had it the opposite way around. You're naive, and you're just foolish. You're gullible, inexperienced. And the Germans are going to attack us again if they can. So we've got to render that impossible by taking away their territory, by limiting their military, by forcing them to pay ruinous reparations, and so forth. So Wilson had seen the American Civil War as a little boy, and he said, well, it's reconciliation and forgiveness. That is the way to long-term peace that they worked in his country. So Wilson was very ill sometimes during the negotiations and was not present for a lot of them, which is often overlooked these days. So Wilson had his 14 points, which he'd unveiled in January 1918, but these had not been carried at the Treaty of Versailles by and large. So the terms hammered out at Versailles were a compromise between what the Big Four wanted, in a sense the Big Three, if we're to exclude Orlando. Anyway, so the United States was dissatisfied with this, and indeed the US Congress refused to sign it. Later, the United States signed the Treaty of Berlin between the United States and Germany, formally ending the war between them, which was much more softer on Germany, I should say. The French General Foch said of Versailles, "This is not a peace, it is a truce for 20 years," which was right, to within 3 months. Anyway, so some of the key terms of Versailles: Article 231, the War Guilt Clause, saying that Germany was solely to blame. Then there's reparations. You broke it, you fix it. It's Pottery Barn rules. So Germany lost territory, as I've already adumbrated, losing a lot of territory in the east to create Poland, and almost all that territory had a Polish majority. All the overseas colonies taken away, what we now call Tanzania, Cameroon, and so forth. A bit of Kaiser Wilhelm II land. It's now the northern part of Papua New Guinea, Namibia. So some of these were given to the French and British, Australians, South Africans as mandates. Anschluss, literally connection. That's German unity with Austria was forbidden. Germany's heavy industry was gravely restricted. The idea so they couldn't build weapons. Also, the Allies wanted less competition for markets in future. The army restricted to 100,000 men. These men, those soldiers all had to do 20 years service, as in you couldn't have men in for a year, train them, and then send them out to bring in another lot to train them. Then you'd have a large pool of trained men. No. They must be all long service volunteers. So the land that Germany had taken from Russia, the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, that was given back. That treaty was cancelled, so that worked out for Lenin. So there are other peace treaties: Saint-Germain between the Allies and Austria, Trianon between the Allies and Hungary, Sèvres between the Allies and the Ottoman Empire, that's basically Turkey, Neuilly between the Allies and Bulgaria. These are all locations around Paris where the treaties were signed, and they all had the same format: war guilt clauses, reparations. The defeated countries must reduce its armed forces and supply of weaponry. Territory was seized. Treaties were signed by diktat: you must sign immediately or face a renewal of the war. And the League of Nations was founded. All the former Central Powers countries were excluded from the League of Nations indefinitely. In the end, the Allies changed their mind about that, and a few years later allowed these countries to join. So what were the repercussions of this treaty? Well, the Germans loathed it. They felt it was humiliating and inflicted suffering upon them. The War Guilt Clause led to an already almost bankrupt Germany paying these hefty reparations. So that almost ruined the economy. So many Germans felt they'd been treated unjustly. They'd been conned. They thought they were going to sign a mild peace along the lines of Woodrow Wilson's 14 points. They published their counterblast of the War Guilt Clause, saying they were not guilty of starting the war. It was the Allies, in fact. We could discuss that debate later, the Fisher thesis and so on. So anyway, there was no just peace, as they said it. It was a victor's peace. Or Jan Christian Smuts, the president of South Africa, he said it was a Carthaginian peace, like when the Romans conquered Carthage 24 centuries earlier and sowed its land with salt, as in so nothing would ever grow there again, to completely raze the country. Well, that's absolutely not true. The Allies occupied only a very small portion of Germany, and they didn't wreck the country. They did restrict its industry and so on, but they did not try and prevent it having agriculture or anything. So the principle of national self-determination had emerged. Woodrow Wilson had promulgated that one, as in a group of people, if they are a nation, they must decide for themselves, do they want to become independent, do they want to be part of a larger political entity? And that was one of the key takeaways from these Paris peace treaties. And this was to cut both ways, and it was to be invoked by German nationalists later. For example, Czechoslovakia created, if Slovaks and Czechs want to leave the Austro-Hungarian Empire and unite together to form Czechoslovakia as an independent country, then that must be allowed, and indeed that's what's happened. So I'll discuss more of this in another video.